What is a wholesaler and are they all crazy? That's what we're going to tackle today. You find out why so many people are getting texts and emails from wholesalers that have off-market properties when you've been struggling to find the right deal to be able to purchase. These seem like a good option. We're going to talk about what wholesaling is and what you might want to know before you engage in a transaction like that. Stay tuned. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. We'd love to get comments from you. If you are a wholesaler and you have product out there, we'd love to hear from you. If you are considering getting in the business to be a wholesaler, or you're just trying to buy a property from somebody that is a wholesaler, let us know what your questions are and we can kind of help you navigate through that. Again, don't forget the thumbs up and the subscribe. Let's get into this. Okay, so wholesaling is basically, I often call it being a real estate agent without a license. Some people feel that that's not fair. Life's not fair. But it is a good description. Here's why. What a wholesaler is trying to do is go out and engineer a deal. So they're going to go out and say, Mr. Seller, this is an off-market property. We'd like to buy it from you. Here's what we'll do. We write a contract for that off-market property. Now we have that in our inventory. In our contract, it says we can market this property to another buyer knowing full well that we're going to sell it. What they're looking to do is either do an A to C transaction or an A to B to C transaction. What's the difference? Well, here's the first difference. An A to C means they're going to use funds from the final transaction to pay for the first transaction. There's some legislation about that. There's some issues with that. It can be done in certain areas in certain ways, but the simplest thing is to do an A to B, which is I would fund transaction A. I'm buying it from a seller. I'm the buyer. In this instance, I'll be the wholesaler. So I agree to buy the property for $450,000. I wholesale the property for $600,000. I pay my $450,000, so I fund it and then immediately go into the next room and turn around and sell it to the next guy for $650,000 and collect the difference between. Now those numbers are massive and they're probably the reason people go, I want to be a wholesaler. If I can go just get something under contract and make $150,000, that's fantastic. The reality is wholesaling really doesn't allow those kind of big numbers. Now there are some ways where you can add value, like if you're buying a property and you break it up and you're doing like a land development deal and then you wholesale that off, those kinds of things can add value where you're changing the structure. Most wholesalers are going to be looking for a fee between $5,000 and $20,000. You get much more than that into the transaction, then they either negotiated an unbelievable deal over here or the end buyer is paying way too much for it. A lot of these properties are distressed. So when I use the term end buyer, it's usually going to be an investor that is purchasing the property to fix it up and then sell it yet again. So now you got a wholesaler buying it from the seller. They become the buyer. They then sell it to you, who is an investor, who then fix it up and sell it to an end user, right? So there's multiple transactions in that case. Wholesalers charging between $5,000 and $20,000 is reasonable depending on what kind of margin there is in the property. However, if you're an investor looking to purchase property, you need to have margin in there. You need to have enough money for the repairs, enough money for what you might get wrong, because you won't get it dead on. You might need enough money in there to hire a professional to be able to sell the property. You need enough money in there for the carrying costs of any money you borrowed to be able to do the transaction and carry it over the time. And then you need a profit. So those are the things in there. But this video wasn't directly intended for investment purposes. So let's talk about it as a homeowner looking for something they can put some elbow grease into to make it work. So if you're looking at a wholesale deal and you want to buy it to occupy it, number one, it has to be in a good enough condition to be able to get a mortgage on it. Most wholesalers don't really want to deal with transactions like that, but there are cases where they will, especially if the price is right. Now, you might not need all that margin. You don't need the margin in there for the money. You don't need the margin in there for the rehab. If you're going to do it yourself, the rehab cost might be cheaper. If it's paint and carpet and you happen to be skilled to be able to do that, so you can do it directly, and you're not reselling it. You're basically just creating sweat equity in the property and then having a place to live and let it appreciate over time. So if that's you, when you get into one of these transactions, I highly recommend that you talk to a real estate professional so that you have a contract that has outs in it. For example, if the deal works and you put down money, a lot of times it's unrefundable. What happens if you go get an inspection and you knew that you were going to have $30,000 of work and you had the skill to do it, but it turns out there's a big issue with that property that is not going to work? Well, now your earnest money is non-refundable. You just lost money. That's scenario one. Scenario two, let's say that you know everything about that property and you want to buy it and it's good to go, and you put down unrefundable earnest money and it turns out they can't get clear and marketable title. Well, now you can't even get clear and marketable title, which means you're not going to be able to sell it for it in the future. So you may not want to buy it. If it's unrefundable earnest money, you're out that money too, right? So there's a lot of things in there. Number three, depending on the wholesale deal, you're actually making a contract with a person who has a contract to buy the house, but doesn't actually own the house, right? So there can be issues, and I've seen this, where the person who owned it was going to sell it to the wholesaler decides they don't want to do it. Family gets involved, it turns into something. So now you have a contract on it. You've spent money on inspections. You've spent time getting things ready, and the person who is obligated to sell it to you can't actually close on it because the other party won't. These are all things you want to think about. Am I against wholesaling? Absolutely not. But here's the point. If you're going to go and get something under contract and then try to sell it to somebody else, and you're going to charge between $5,000 and $20,000, why not get a real estate license? You could list the property on the open market. If it's $200,000 or less, the commissions that we charge for something like that, which is 100% negotiable, you could charge less or more, is about $6,000, right? So that's the same money there. And if the property price is $400,000, well, that's $12,000. So you could get the same money involved in that transaction. Now, granted, if they're willing to sell it to you and you do a prehab, something where you do some work to the property, add a little bit of value, and then sell it, and it's going to be far more than you would make on whatever commissions you charge, then by all means wholesale it. I think it's an extremely valid way to do business. The reason it doesn't work for most investors is wholesalers are charging prices that once you put the money into fixing it, if you have any carrying costs, there really isn't anything left. And if their estimates for repairs are really small, it's because you'd be doing the work yourself. Unless that's your full-time gig, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So those are things you're going to want to look at when it comes down to wholesaling. Understand what it is. Make sure you get clear and marketable title. All right. Protect yourself. And make sure that you inspect the property regardless. This way you know what repairs need to be done and get some actual estimates from contractors if you're not doing the work yourself. Thanks so much. Again, thank you if you made it to this far in the video. I appreciate you. Please consider subscribing and giving us a comment on the content. We would love to hear from you. What question do you want us to answer on one of these videos? Thanks so much.